His touch wasn't a request, it seized control. Not like a burglar sneaking through shadows, but like someone who'd grown weary of acting indifferent. The bedsheets were tangled, my breathing uneven, and the expression in his eyes suggested he discovered something beyond his command that he didn't wish to surrender. Love wasn't what he murmured. Instead, he breathed, "This will stay with you forever." And it has through every night that followed. If that drew you in, there's plenty more ahead. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch the next part of what choosing to remain truly means. Thank you for listening and feeling every single word. There was a period when I believed love would arrive, accompanied by melodies, the type that drifts from open windows during warm summer dawns, the kind you find yourself humming even after forgetting the lyrics. My mother would hum in that way while preparing tea, her palms cupped around a chipped china mug, steam rising beneath her face like a delicate shroud. Music has been absent from my life for quite some time. On my wedding morning, no strings played, just the sharp echo of my heels against marble flooring and the faint wheeze of my father's breathing as he mentally rehearsed an apology he'd never voice aloud. Words weren't exchanged between us, they weren't necessary. My signature was already pressed into the document, his trembling beside mine at the page's bottom like it yearned to escape. Yet I remained. I stayed because when a father declares we're indebted to him for everything, you accept it as truth. Because we doesn't include him, it means me. My flesh, my identity, my quiet compliance that my first glimpse of Richard Hale wasn't at the ceremony. It happened the day prior through the towering glass panels of his manor. He stood at the library's far end, turned away, arms crossed, staring at shelves of books as though punishing them for withholding answers to questions he couldn't articulate. He never turned, never acknowledged my presence. I remember thinking, he resembles someone who's already mourned the person this house was meant for. And I was correct. This mansion wasn't constructed for affection, it was built for show, for agreements and backup plans. I was simply the newest steel dot. The gown they provided was cream-colored, delicate yet weighty, like wearing an inheritance. That was never mine. It dragged behind me like remorse. The lace irritated my throat. I remained silent. I wore my mother's brooch at the waist, small, silver, shaped like a sparrow. She used to say sparrows always find their way home. I wasn't certain I would. The ceremony took place in the eastern parlor beneath a chandelier older than both our ages. It drooped low as if it too had grown tired of illuminating people who never looked upward. The attendees, if they could be called that, sat in frigid silence, hands folded, expressions politely blank. The air carried scents of buffed wood, white lily, and something else, perhaps regret, the kind that soaks into walls and never departs. No music played, no toasts were raised, no knowing glances exchanged across the space, only a notary reciting legal phrases in a tone better suited for a funeral than wedding vows. Richard positioned himself opposite me, his suit immaculate, his bearing rigid, his stare unwavering. When the moment came to exchange bands, he accepted mine without ceremony. His fingertips grazed mine, and for just an instant, barely a heartbeat, he hesitated. The ring slipped on colder than anticipated, not snug, not loose, simply final. No. Kiss followed, no tender words, just the steady ticking of the grandfather clock behind us, consistent as guilt. Later, as the guests dispersed like morning mist, I perched at the reception room's edge, hands resting in my lap, the ring weighing heavy on my finger as if it knew too much. Richard approached, not hurriedly, not reluctantly, just with precision. He didn't sit, but leaned close enough that only I could hear. "I won't love you. I won't pretend otherwise, but I won't harm you either unless you force my hand." Then he straightened, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked away. That, strangely and painfully, was the most truthful thing anyone had spoken to me in weeks. I didn't weep that night, not from strength, but because tears would only confirm I'd lost something. But I hadn't, not yet. I'd simply been positioned like a porcelain figurine on a shelf in someone else's home, admired, ignored, expected to remain motionless dot in the stillness of that first evening as Mrs. Hale. I wandered the estate's corridors. Alone, my fingertips traced the wood paneling, the velvet wallpaper, the edges of picture frames containing unfamiliar faces. The entire place carried faint traces of cedar and polished leather wealth's signature scent. Somewhere within this mansion, I was supposed to transform into a wife. But no one had explained who I was meant to become. Meanwhile, I discovered my bedroom separate from his naturally. A fire already crackled. The bed was prepared. A book waited on the nightstand, unopened, expectant like everything else in this place. I sat by the window, unpinned the sparrow from my dress, and cradled it in my palm. "You'll return home, my mother had once said, her voice gentle and hopeful. And I whispered to the empty room, "I hope I remember where that is." The first thing that struck me was the quiet, not the soothing kind that accompanies peace, but the hollow type that lingers after too many words go unspoken. It bounced through the vast hallways of the Hale estate, wrapping around marble columns and high ceilings like a spirit with nowhere else to wander. No voices could be heard, no footsteps echoed, just the occasional whisper of wind slipping through window frame gaps. As if even the air preferred not to linger, the staff moved silently, almost invisibly. They acknowledged me with nods, but rarely made eye contact. I couldn't determine if this was training, discomfort, or something else, something learned in a house where warmth was never part of the blueprint. That morning, I woke to find my rooms, fire already burning and breakfast arranged on a silver tray by the windows. Black coffee, unbuttered toast, and an orange peeled with surgical precision. Someone had prepared this for me, but not him. Richard hadn't spoken to me since our wedding night, yet he hadn't departed either. I could hear him pacing in the room above mine, slow and measured, like a man tallying his thoughts one by one. I sat by the window, the tray untouched, my fingers absently toying with the cloth napkin's edge. My mother used to say a silent house meant a restless soul, and this house possessed the silence of a long-abandoned cathedral. I attempted to keep busy, exploring room by room. I wandered through the Hale estate like a visitor in a museum where exhibits were arranged not with care but control. Every item had its place, every color complemented another. Everything appeared beautiful, yet nothing felt inhabited. In one of the smaller sitting rooms, I discovered an old record player, dusty but intact. I touched one of the vinyl surfaces, smudging years of neglect with my fingertip. No records played here, I thought. No laughter, no memory-making. A maid entered, startled to find me. "Would you like me to clean that, Mrs. Hale?" she asked, eyes downcast. Mrs. Hale. I still flinched each time I heard it. "No," I said. "Just leave it. I prefer things that remember." She paused. Something flickered across her face, not quite a smile, but something warmer than silence. Later that afternoon, I found the old kitchen tucked behind the main one, probably once used by household staff in an earlier era. It was smaller, simpler. Genuine, the tiles were cracked, the walls bore gentle stains of time and use. It felt like a place people had actually lived in, not merely passed through, on impulse. I made tea, not the perfectly measured kind from the formal kitchen, but the messy, real kind my mother used to prepare. Loose leaves, steam, that gentle hiss that fills a room with memory. I stood by the stove, holding the cup in both hands, eyes closed, and for the first time in this house, I breathed. I didn't hear Richard enter. His voice cut through the air knot. loudly but enough to startle me from the moment. "You're in the wrong kitchen." I turned, nearly dropping the cup. He stood in the doorway, tie loosened, jacket draped over his shoulder, as if he'd walked straight from a boardroom into someone else's life by accident. "This one has better spirits," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyes flicked. To the cup, then to my hands, then finally to my face. "Did you make that?" he asked. I nodded. "It's just tea." He stepped closer slowly, like I might disappear. "May I?" I hesitated, then handed him the cup. His fingers brushed mine as he took it again, that same half-second pause, like contact surprised him. He sipped not much, just enough to taste. Then he said, "My mother used to make tea like this." And just like that, the room shifted. The silence wasn't as heavy. We didn't speak much after that. He handed the cup back. I rinsed it without a word, and he left the way he came, quietly, with something unreadable behind his eyes. But it was something. That night, I found a book by my nightstand that I hadn't noticed before. Wuthering Heights, with a note resting on top, scribbled in strong, masculine handwriting. "Since you like things that remember." No name, no flourish, just those 6 words. I stared at it for a long time, not because it was romantic, it wasn't. Not because I loved the book, I didn't, but because he'd noticed. Somewhere in his own silent way, Richard Hale had seen me. Not as a wife, not as an obligation, but as someone trying. Later, as I lay in bed, I opened to the first page. The words blurred, my eyes burned. The house remained quiet, still too large, still not mine. But that night, the silence didn't feel so hostile. It felt tentative, like something waiting to be rewritten, my mother used to say. The heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. She said it while playing piano, her hands light as breath, coaxing melody from an old upright at our lake house. That piano had a broken E key and a pedal that squeaked if pressed too hard. But it never stopped her from playing or me from listening. It had been 3 years since I last visited that place, 3 years since her hands touched those keys, 3 years since she died in that same house, with music still in the air. After a week in Richard's estate, its rooms too pristine, its silence too sharp, I asked to return to the lake house just for a day. To collect some of my things, I told him. He didn't ask what those things were, didn't ask if I would return. He just nodded once without looking up from whatever business held his attention. But later that night, I found a driver waiting at the door. And when I opened the car door, the next morning, Richard was already inside. "I didn't expect you to come," I said quietly. "I didn't expect you to go alone," he replied, staring out the window. That was all. The drive was 2 hours long and mostly wordless. We passed fields brushed in autumn gold, old fences leaning under time's weight, and barns that looked like they remembered better days. I stared out the window, letting memory fill the spaces Richard didn't. I saw my mother on the porch, apron, still flour-dusted, waving at the mailman. I saw myself running barefoot down the dock, sunburned, laughing, unafraid. I saw the lake, always the lake, calm as glass in the morning, wild and gray by dusk. When we arrived, the house looked smaller. Then I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown older. Richard didn't follow me inside. He stood on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, gaze turned toward the water. I left him there and went into the house alone. Dust greeted me first soft and familiar, then the scent of pine and old paper, and then the piano. It sat in the corner of the main room, covered in a faded quilt. I pulled it off gently, revealing the worn mahogany, the chipped keys, the tarnished petals. I pressed one middle C, still in tune, almost. I smiled, and for a moment I forgot the weight of the ring on my finger. I sat at the bench and opened the lid. My fingers found the shape of the song before I remembered its name. It was the last piece my mother played, a quiet lullaby she never taught me with words, only through repetition. Through the way her shoulder would rise slightly at the chorus, through the way she always slowed down at the end as if trying to keep the moment from ending. My fingers stumbled. I winced. The E key stuck just like always. Some things never change. Behind me, the floor creaked. I turned. Richard stood in the doorway, coat still on. "I didn't know you played," he said. Not really." I looked back at the keys. I remember enough to miss it. He stepped into the room slowly, like the house might reject him. His eyes scanned the room, not judging, just taking it in. He looked at the books stacked on the mantel, the faded armchair near the fire, the cracked picture frame of me at 6, gap-toothed and waving. "This place," he said softly, "feels lived in." "It was," I said, before life stopped showing up. I shifted on the bench, made space beside me. He didn't sit, but after a pause, he walked over and placed his fingers on the high notes tentative, like he was afraid of touching something sacred. "Did your mother live here long?" "Most of her life." He nodded, pressed a key. It rang out clear and lonely. "I think," he said, still looking at the piano, "your mother saved my life once." I turned to him. "What?" I was 19, drunk, angry, stupid. I crashed a car into a guardrail on Route 73. It was snowing. I remember the windshield cracking. I remember thinking I wasn't going to make it. He paused. And then there was a woman in a navy coat kneeling beside me, talking to me like I mattered. She stayed until the ambulance came. I didn't even know her name. I found it out years later in a donation ledger. Helen Whitmore, volunteer medic. The room fell. Silent but not empty. "She never told me," I said, breath shallow. "Maybe she didn't think you'd want to know the kind of man she helped." I looked down. The sparrow pen on my coat caught the light. She believed people could be broken and still be good. Richard's voice was quiet, then she was kinder than most. He sat beside me, finally, not close, but not distant. His fingers found the keys again, random, uneven. He didn't play, just pressed here and there, as if trying to remember what it felt like to make something gentle. I didn't stop him. We sat there a while, two strangers who shared a history they hadn't written, in a house that once belonged to someone who taught us both how to stay when it would have been easier to leave. Outside, the lake shimmered. Inside, the silence didn't feel so final anymore. It was on the third shelf, behind a stack of forgotten gardening books and a dusty teacup with a chip along its rim, a plain leather-bound notebook. No name, no label, just the scent of lavender, an old paper, and the soft crackle of pages that hadn't been turned in years. I wasn't looking for it. I'd come to the lake house again, this time on my own. Richard had meetings, or so he said. Part of me suspected he wanted to give me space. Part of me wondered if he just didn't want to return to the place where something inside him had shifted. But the house had called to me, not loudly, not with urgency, just quietly, like a soft knock that waits for you to hear it. I carried the journal to the kitchen, placed it on the table, and sat in the same chair my mother used to read letters from. Her coffee cup still sat on the windowsill, faintly stained. Dust gathered around it like time had politely paused. The first page of the journal was blank. The second held a date, November 8th, 2003. And then, in her familiar slanted handwriting, some people come into your life like accidents. You don't choose them, but they arrive anyway, bleeding, breathless, needing someone to look at them like they're still human. My breath caught. She was talking about him. Entry after entry. My mother wrote about her time volunteering at the roadside emergency unit, stories of strangers, small wounds, and quiet recoveries. But 3 entries stood out, dated in the same week, describing A boy, 19, found on Route 73, barely conscious, drifting in and out. No ID at first, broken wrist, concussion, cold eyes. He didn't want to be saved, she wrote. He told me not to waste my time, but I held his hand anyway. I read the words again, slower this time. I saw something in him, not innocence, not even remorse. Just someone who had forgotten that being alive was still worth something. I closed the book. The air in the kitchen felt different still, but heavy, like memory had crawled in through the cracks in the walls and made itself at home. That evening, I returned to the Hale estate. The house greeted me the way it always did, quiet, proper, without affection, but I no longer hated the silence. I'd started hearing what lived beneath it. Richard was in the study, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes trained on a stack of papers that looked like they hadn't moved in hours. I didn't wait to be noticed. I read something, I said from the doorway. He looked up slowly, face unreadable. My mother kept a journal. She wrote about you. He blinked once, then again. I thought she might have. I think you meant something to her more than you realized. He leaned back, rubbing his thumb against his temple like he was trying to erase. The thought, I didn't deserve her kindness. That's not for you to decide. I crossed the room, sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, that night, I wasn't just drunk. I was trying to make something stop hurting. I thought crashing that car would make it disappear. He swallowed. She didn't ask what I'd done. She just told me I was still here. And that meant something. He looked up. I never forgot her voice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the journal, placed it gently in front of him. You should read it, I said. He stared at it like it might burn him, but he didn't push it away. Instead, he ran his hand along the edge of the cover, not opening it, just acknowledging that it existed. I'm sorry, he said. I frowned. For what? For marrying you like it was a transaction. For thinking I could treat you like a number on a page. You didn't marry me for love, I said. I didn't expect you to. He looked away. But I didn't expect you to start caring either. I added softly, and now that you do, maybe that matters more. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was waiting. Then he stood and walked to the fireplace, picking something up from the mantel, a photo I hadn't seen before. It was of a woman laughing, strong cheekbones, wind in her hair. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a young boy who looked so much like Richard, it made me pause. My mother, he said. I joined him. She died the year after I crashed that car. He continued. I was already lost that night on Route 73. I think I was hoping to join her. I looked at him. You didn't? No, he said, voice cracking. Because of yours. We stood there side by side, two people who'd lost mothers and found each other in the echo. No kiss, no embrace, just presence. And in that moment, it was enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window, staring at the estate grounds, bathed in pale light. Somewhere below, Richard was probably still awake, reading the words my mother had left behind. I placed my palm against the glass. The surface was cold, but I wasn't. Not anymore, because somewhere between the past and the present, a door had opened, and neither of us had closed it. It began with thunder, not the sharp kind that cracks the sky open, but the kind that rumbles low, like a warning you feel in your spine before you hear it. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the old light switch, flicking it out of habit. Nothing. The storm had knocked out the power, and the Hale estate, so used to being under control, had surrendered, if only briefly, to nature's unpredictability. Silence was heavier in the dark, not oppressive, just honest. I lit a single candle and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The marble tiles were colder than usual, but the quiet hum of rain against the windows gave the space a kind of comfort I hadn't known it could hold. I didn't expect him to come. The knock on my door was soft, not firm, not demanding. Just two short taps that sounded more like a question than a presence. When I opened it, Richard stood there. No suit jacket, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair slightly damp. There was something different in his posture, not stooped, not tense, just still. I brought a blanket, he said. It took me a second to notice the folded quilt in his armswool. Old, the kind you keep not because it's expensive, but because it remembers warmth better than anything else. For the cold, he added, like I hadn't already understood. I stepped aside. He entered without looking at me. We didn't go to the fireplace. We sat on the floor, backs against the foot of my bed, the candlelight throwing soft shapes against the walls. He handed me the quilt but didn't take any part of it for himself. I looked at him. "Why are you here?" I asked. He didn't answer right. Away. His gaze stayed on the flickering light as if waiting for it to blink first. Then, because you left the door open? I don't know what I expected him to say, something grand. Maybe a confession, a fracture, but not that. Not something so simple, so human. I pulled the quilt over my lap and looked down at my hands. They didn't tremble. That surprised me. I'm tired of being in rooms where people pretend they don't feel anything. I whispered. He didn't nod, didn't agree, but his silence was not the cool kind. It was the kind that listened. The storm picked up. Rain lashed at the windows. The candle flickered violently, then steadied again. And then, without a word, he reached out. His hand found mine, not firmly, not with urgency, just a touch, barely more than a brush. I looked down at our fingers. He wasn't holding, he was asking. So I laced my fingers into his, and he stayed. We sat like that for a long time. The thunder rolled. The rain continued. Somewhere in the house, something creaked. And still he didn't let go. No one kissed. No one undressed. There was no fire between us, only the slow warmth of shared stillness. And I think somehow that meant more. "You scare me," he said at last. The words came out small, too soft for a man like him. "Why?" I asked. "Because you're not trying to be anything." He paused. "You're just here. And somehow that's enough." I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the CEO, didn't see the signature on the marriage license, the suits, the contracts, the polished answers. I saw the boy my mother had once saved. The man who still didn't know what to do with kindness that didn't come with a cost. "I'm not here to fix you," I said gently. He looked down. "Good, because I'm still learning how to hold myself together." A beat, then a whisper from him, barely audible. "Don't leave." It wasn't a demand. It was the kind of request people make when they've already decided you won't say yes. So I answered with my hand, with my stillness, with my staying. The candle burned low. Our shoulders touched, not fully, just enough to know we weren't alone in that room. And as the storm began to fade, I realized I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Not because it had gone away, but because he hadn't. That night, I didn't sleep much, but I didn't feel tired. I sat awake long after he left, listening to the rain slow to a whisper, feeling the phantom weight of his hand still woven through mine. And when I finally closed my eyes, I did so knowing that not all beginnings come with fireworks. Some come with a knock and a blanket and a hand that stays. I saw her before I heard her name, a tall woman, poised with a navy trench coat and the kind of self-possession that only comes from knowing you've already made peace with things that once tried to destroy you. She didn't smile when I opened the front door. She didn't introduce herself either. She looked me up and down, not rudely, just analytically. Then she said, "Is Richard home?" I blinked. And you are? I asked. Her eyes didn't waver. Someone who used to matter. I led her to the front sitting room where light poured in through the tall windows, but the air still felt oddly still. I offered her tea. She declined. She sat upright, crossed her legs, and stared out toward the garden. "Tell him Amelia's here," she said. That name meant nothing to me. And somehow everything. Before I could move, Richard appeared in the doorway. He didn't freeze, didn't soften. He simply looked at her like a man glancing into a mirror he no longer needed. "Amelia," he said, one word flat, controlled. "Richard," she answered, tilting her head slightly. "You've changed. People do." "Not always." I stayed, unsure if I should, but Amelia's eyes found mine again. "I'm not here to interfere," she said plainly. "This isn't about you." "I didn't think it was," I replied quietly. That surprised her. I saw it in the flicker of her expression. Then she turned back to Richard. "I came because your father's dying." Silence. No thunderclap, no gasp. Just the sudden sense that something unspoken had cracked, even if no one had the courage to acknowledge it. "You should go," she said. "If only to see how little you still owe him." Richard's jaw tightened. "I buried him a long time ago." "No," she said. "You buried the version of you he hated. But the boy who needed him, that one's still stuck, still waiting." Later, after she left, I found him in the back garden, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon like it might tell him what to feel. "You knew she'd come," I said. He nodded. "She always shows up when things start to burn. She doesn't seem cruel." "She's not. She's worse. She remembers me." We sat on the garden bench, the kind people buy for display and rarely use. But that evening, it held weight. "I haven't spoken to my father in 10 years, he said. "Not since I walked out of his house and told him I'd rather be nothing than become him." "Did he try to stop you?" "No." His voice was cold. He handed me a coat and closed the door behind me. I reached over and placed my hand on the wooden slats between us, not touching him, but close enough. "You still carry him?" I said. He didn't deny it. "That night on Route 73, he continued, I wasn't just running from myself. I was trying to erase him. The anger, the voice in my head telling me I'd never be good enough, even if I bled for it. I let the silence settle. And now he's dying," he added. "And I don't know if seeing him will make things better or break what little peace I've managed to build." I turned to him. "I think," I said, "peace doesn't come from pretending the past never happened. It comes from knowing you survived it and still choosing to live." He looked at me, really looked. And in that moment, I saw the boy behind the man, the one who still flinched at closed doors. "You're not obligated to forgive him," I added, "but you are allowed to forgive yourself." He exhaled slowly. "That's harder than it sounds." "I know," I said, "but maybe going to see him isn't about him at all. Maybe it's about letting the part of you he broke learn how to stand again." We left the next morning. No bags, no flowers, just a shared silence and the kind of resolve that doesn't announce itself but settles into your bones like weather before a storm dot. The hospital was beige, predictably clean, unremarkable. His father was thinner than I expected pale, eyes sunken like he'd been drained of memory. When Richard entered, the older man blinked slowly. No smile, no gasp, just recognition quiet and old. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. Richard replied, "Neither did I." I stood just outside the room, not intruding, not part of that story, but part of the man who walked in to face it. They didn't shout. There were no apologies, no breakdowns. Just two men separated by decades of silence, now sharing a space where no more harm could be done. The damage had been spent. What remained was the quiet aftermath when Richard walked out. He looked lighter, not healed, but less burdened. In the car ride back, he reached for my hand without speaking. His grip was firm, grounded, present. I didn't ask what had been said. He didn't offer it. But as our fingers intertwined, I knew something had changed. Not loudly, not instantly, but permanently, because it wasn't Amelia I needed to fear. It wasn't the past. It was the weight he never let anyone else carry now finally shared. The ring had always been too heavy not in weight, but in what it carried. It wasn't mine when I wore it the first time. It belonged to legacy, to debt, to a decision that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with rescue. I had let it sit on my finger like a mark of surrender, but now, back in the Hale estate after visiting his father, I felt its presence again. And this time it asked a question I hadn't been ready to answer. Richard had been quiet since we returned, not withdrawn, just quieter in a way that wasn't avoidance. Like a man walking back into a room he used to fear and finding it empty of ghosts. I watched him from the doorway of the study as he sat on the couch, head bowed, fingers steepled under his chin. The light from the fireplace painted his face in a glow that made him look years younger, or maybe just less armored. He didn't look up when he spoke. I always thought forgiveness was something someone else gave you, he said, but it turns out it's something you have to allow yourself. I stepped into the room. Did he ask for it? I asked. No, his voice was quiet, but he didn't try to keep me from it either. I sat beside him. The silence between us didn't ache the way it once did. There was a softness to the evening, a slow exhale between two people who'd run out of ways to hide. I brought something, I said. He turned toward me. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the velvet box that had once held my wedding ring. I opened it. Inside, nestled like memory, was the band of dull silver he had slipped onto my hand. Weeks ago, in front of people who hadn't cared, I took the ring out and placed it in his palm, his brows furrowed, eyes searching. I'm giving it back, I said, calm but steady. Not out of anger, not as rejection. He said nothing. I continued. When you gave it to me, it was out of necessity, transaction, obligation. I met his gaze. But if you want to give it again, do it because you choose to. He held the ring for a long time, turning it in his fingers. His thumb brushed the inside where I now saw a faint engraving. Still here. I had that added the night before the wedding, he said. Didn't think you'd notice. I didn't, I whispered. Not until now. He looked up, eyes catching mine. I didn't think I deserved to give anyone that kind of promise, he admitted, but I wanted it there, just in case. He closed his fist around the ring, then opened it again, then reached for my left hand. He didn't speak as he slid the ring back on my finger, but this time the weight felt different, no longer a burden, no longer a cage, but something grounding, solid, real. He didn't kiss me, didn't say I love you, but he said this time I'm the one who